There is a particular kind of ache that never gets a funeral. No one brings food to your door for it. No one lowers their voice and asks how you're holding up. There is no card in the store for the loss you're carrying because the person you are mourning is still here. They still answer the phone sometimes. Their name still lights up your screen. You could, in theory, reach out to them tonight. And that is exactly what makes it unbearable. Not that they are gone, but that they are almost here, close enough to touch and somehow already lost. Maybe it's a parent who is still alive, but who stopped being the person who could hold you a long time ago. Maybe it's a friend who slowly turned into a stranger without either of you ever deciding it. Maybe it's someone whose body is in the same house as yours, whose footsteps you still hear through the walls, and yet the person you loved inside that body left without ever saying goodbye. You know the feeling I mean, the one that doesn't have a word soft enough to carry it. And here's the part that makes it lonelier than ordinary grief. You can't even call it grief out loud, because when someone dies, the whole world agrees to be gentle with you for a while. But when someone is still breathing and simply gone in all the ways that actually mattered, there is no permission slip for your sorrow, so you carry it in silence. And you tell yourself you have no right to feel this heavy over someone who is technically still right here. But I want to say something to you before we go any further, because it needs to be said early, while you're still bracing for it. What you are feeling is not you being dramatic. It is not you being ungrateful for the person still standing in front of you. This isn't damage, and it isn't weakness dressed up as sorrow. This is what love does when it suddenly has nowhere left to land. Grief is only love that has lost its home. And yours has lost its home while the person who was that home keeps walking around, alive, unaware, going about their day as if nothing at all has been buried. And that's where it gets complicated, because the world only ever taught you how to mourn what is finished. A death has an ending. There is a date, a service, a stone with 2 years carved into it. Everyone knows what to do with a death. But no one ever showed you what to do with a loss that keeps breathing. There is no ceremony for the mother who is still alive, but no longer really knows you. There is no casket for the friendship that just quietly stopped answering. So the grief has nowhere to go, and instead of moving through you and out, it stays. It circles. It waits by the door for a version of them that is never walking back through it. Here is the noble part though. The part almost no one ever says to you. The reason this hurts as much as it does is not because something is broken in you, it's because some part of you refused to stop loving them, even after loving them became a wound. You kept the door open, you kept a light on in a window they stopped looking at. That is not foolishness, and it is not you failing to move on. That is the most loyal thing a heart is capable of. To keep loving in the direction of someone who can no longer love you back, and to do it anyway quietly, without applause, and without witness. What looks from the outside like being stuck is very often just devotion that no one ever released you from. So let's stay here for a moment, inside the strange texture of it, because it deserves to be named slowly. The hardest thing about grieving someone who is still alive is that there is no clean line between hope and mourning. When someone dies, hope closes all the way. But when someone is still here, hope stays cracked open, and that thin, open crack is where most of the pain quietly lives. Every birthday, you wonder if this is the year they'll call. Every holiday, you leave a little room at the table, not on the plate, but somewhere in your chest. You grieve them on Tuesday and you hope for them on Wednesday, and by Thursday you are worn down to nothing from carrying both of those things at the exact same time. And what makes this even harder is that you keep losing them over and over again. With a death, you lose the person one time, and then you begin the long, slow work of living around the empty space they left. But with someone who is still alive, the loss doesn't happen just once. It happens again every single time they disappoint you in the exact way you swore you wouldn't let them disappoint you again. Every unanswered message becomes a small, private funeral. Every cold reply reopens the same wound in the same tender place. You never get to grieve and be finished. You grieve on a loop, and the loop slowly wears a groove into you. There's a specific loneliness in it too, one that's hard to say out loud. Because when you're grieving the dead, people gather around you and hold you up. But when you're grieving the living, you often have to protect the very person you're mourning. You don't tell others how deeply they've hurt you, because some part of you still wants to shield them from judgment. You still find yourself defending the parent who forgot your birthday, softening the story of the friend who vanished, making quiet excuses for the person who left you standing alone in the doorway of your own life. So you grieve them, and then you turn around and guard them, and no one ever sees you doing either one. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, you become fluent in a language no one asked you to speak, the language of their moods, their good days, their small openings. You watch them the way you'd watch the weather, waiting for a break in the clouds, a slightly warmer text than usual, a moment when their guard drops and the person you remember flickers back into the room for a second or two. And in that second, your whole body lights up with a hope you already know better than to trust, because you have been here before, and you know exactly how this story tends to go. The warmth never lasts, but you reach for it anyway, every single time, because a few seconds of the person you love still feels worth the long days of ache that always seem to follow. That is not you being naive. That is a heart doing whatever it can to keep itself alive on almost nothing. And underneath all of it sits a question you rarely let yourself ask directly, because it feels too much like betrayal. The question is, would this be easier if they were simply gone? And the shame that arrives the moment you even think it is enormous. But that thought is not cruelty, and it is not you being a bad person. It's the sound of a heart that has grown exhausted from being asked to hope, with no reason left to hope. It isn't that you want to lose them. It's that you are so tired of losing them slowly, in pieces, on a schedule you never agreed to. There is a real difference between wishing someone gone and wishing the ache would finally be allowed to end. What you long for isn't their absence. It's a single night of rest from the endless almost. And that almost is the whole architecture of this particular pain. Almost close, almost reachable, almost the person they used to be. You keep catching brief glimpses, a good day, a warm moment, a sudden flash of the old them. And each glimpse pulls you right back in, exactly when you'd finally started to let go, so you can never fully mourn them, and you can never fully keep them either. You end up living in the narrow hallway between those two doors, and that hallway is cold, and you have been standing in it, alone, for a very long time now. And your body keeps a quiet record of all of it, even when your mind is trying its best to move on. It tenses when their name comes up in an ordinary conversation. It goes still and careful when someone innocently asks how they're doing these days. There's a held breath you take before you check your messages, a small bracing you do without ever deciding to, because part of you is always half expecting the disappointment and half hoping to finally be wrong about them. You have been carrying this so long that the carrying itself has become invisible to you. Just the shape your shoulders sit in now, just the weather you happen to live inside. But it is there, it has always been there, and naming it, finally, out loud, is maybe the first time in a long while that someone has come and stood in that hallway beside you instead of asking why you haven't already left it. And there's a grief hidden inside the grief, one that's even harder to sit with, because it isn't only them you are mourning. It's who you used to be when you still had them, the version of you that felt safe, the version that hadn't yet come to expect the silence. When you lose someone who is still alive, you also quietly lose the self that once existed in the warmth of them, the you that laughed easily around that friend, the you that felt small and held and safe near that parent. That self is gone too, and no one grieves that one alongside you. You grieve it entirely alone, in the quiet, in the small hours, in the moments you catch yourself reaching for a phone you already know you shouldn't dial. And there's something else you are quietly mourning that almost never gets named. The future you had always quietly assumed you would share with them. The version of your life where they were still in it. The phone calls you thought you'd always be able to make. The person you imagined standing somewhere near you at the moments that were supposed to matter most. When someone is still alive but gone from your life, you don't only lose the past the two of you had together. You lose the entire future you had already built for them in your mind, quietly, brick by brick, without ever once realizing you'd been building it. And that future has to be grieved too, even though it never got the chance to happen. You end up mourning a whole life that existed nowhere but inside your own hope, and that is a strange and terribly lonely thing to have to lay to rest. And maybe the cruelest part is the guilt that trails you through all of it. The nagging sense that you should be over this by now. That because nothing technically happened, no death, no dramatic ending, just a long, slow fading. You have no real reason to still be aching this much. So you set a second weight on top of the first, the grief itself, and then the shame of the grief. You tell yourself other people have lost so much more than you have. You measure your sorrow against theirs and quietly decide that yours doesn't count. But sorrow was never meant to be weighed on a scale. Pain does not have to win a contest against someone else's pain in order to be real and worthy of tenderness. And here is the quiet, noble truth sitting underneath the whole thing. The fact that you still ache means the love was real. Numbness would have been so much easier. If you had never loved them deeply in the first place, their fading wouldn't cost you a single thing. The grief is the proof. It is the receipt of a love that genuinely happened, that mattered, that was worth every bit of the risk you took in giving it. Your continued sorrow is not a malfunction, and it is not you being weak. It is the last honest thread still connecting you to something that was, for a time, real and warm and true. To grieve them is to refuse to pretend they never mattered. And that refusal, however much it costs you to carry it, is a quiet kind of dignity. And slowly, not all at once, never all at once, something inside you begins to loosen. Not because you stop loving them, but because you finally stop demanding that the ache be proof you did something wrong. The grief doesn't vanish. It just stops being your enemy. You begin to let it sit down beside you like an old companion, one that only ever showed up in the first place because you cared far too much to walk away clean. And that is its own strange kind of grace. To let the love and the loss live in the same body without tearing yourself in half in the space between them. There's one more reframe waiting for you here, at the very end, if you can let it in. Maybe the ability to grieve someone who is still alive was never a wound at all. Maybe it's the clearest evidence of how deeply you are able to love, that you love the way most people are far too frightened to, all the way to the bottom, even when it isn't returned, even when it quietly costs you everything. That capacity was never your weakness. It was always the most tender, unguarded human thing about you. The world may have taught you somewhere along the way to be ashamed of loving that much, but it was never the loving that hurt you in the end. It was only that they couldn't stay. And the strangest, kindest truth of all is that you were never actually alone in that cold hallway. There are far more of us standing in it than you could ever know. People who smile through their days and carry a name in their chest that no one around them has ever heard. Still loving, still aching, still standing at a door that hasn't opened in years, keeping the light on anyway. So if this reached something real in you tonight, I want to hear the part you never let yourself say. Down in the comments, tell me, who are you still grieving who is somehow still here? Not the polished version, not the story you tell at dinner, the true one, the name you carry that no one knows you're carrying. Say it here, where it's quiet, where someone else who knows this exact ache from the inside will read your words and feel, maybe for the very first time, a little less alone in it. The love was real. That is why it aches.